Hey guys, this is Rick. Happy New Year. It's been a decade almost since I started talking about Bitcoin, and time flies, doesn't it? So I thought it appropriate to now, look down a little bit on the past decade and then look ahead to the next decade. Because one thing that's pretty universal is that we always overestimate what happens in 1 year and underestimate what happens in 10. As an example of that, Nokia was the undisputed king of the hill for mobile phones in the year 2000. And in 2010, they practically didn't exist anymore. They were back to making rubber boots. So there's that. 10 years ago, I talked about the opportunities for Bitcoin. I talked a bit about international trade. I talked about usability. I talked about the trajectory in general. And in particular, I noted that for any new technology, it typically takes 10 years from conception to somebody hitting the magic point of usability. This was the case with blogging from the first stumbling blocks until WordPress and Typepad hit. This was the case with BBSs and file sharing, mind you, from the first stumbling blocks until Napster hit in 1999. And this was the case with streaming video from the first very clumsy animated GIFs that were actually streaming to YouTube hitting in 2006. So I figured this would be about 10 years from 2009, 2010, and here we are. But usability was thrown completely off track by the hijacking of Bitcoin BTC in 2015, 2016, where there was this new ridiculous narrative that everybody should run their own node. Like, no, I'm sorry, but your Aunt Granny is not interested in running her own Raspberry Pi baked into the wall running new Linux. It's not going to happen. It's as ridiculous as if every email user would be running their own email server. Yes, they can, which is the point. They can. But the breakthrough for email, you'll remember, was actually Hotmail. So the windows of opportunity have shifted a little bit. And look, if we're looking forward to the next decade then, I think Bitcoin BTC will still have value by the end of the next decade, but it'll just be boring. It'll not be interesting anymore because the world will have moved on from there. A bit like, everybody used to be afraid of the big blue. Everybody used to be afraid of IBM. And then everybody was afraid of Microsoft. Today, IBM and Microsoft still have quite a bit of value and their stock is still traded, but nobody's afraid of them. They're boring. They're not interesting. I think Bitcoin BTC will be the same. Rather, I think momentum will have shifted either to Bitcoin BCH or to Ethereum or to a dark horse that we don't know of today. But Bitcoin BTC is, as of today, a completely dead end. For social reasons, mind you, not for technical reasons. If you're reading Peopleware, you'll notice that most projects fail for social reasons, not technical reasons. And this is key to remember. It doesn't matter how good a coder you are if you don't have the socials right. An interesting observation throughout history is that the real gains from a truly disruptive technology is never realized by its first inventors. The inventors are only capable of thinking about a new technology in terms of what it replaces. The automobile is a better horse and cart. The electric engine is a better steam engine. And in this latter example, I have one of my favorite numbers is that when half of London's factories were electrified, as in having had a drop-in replacement from steam power to electric power, it would take another 60 years, 60 years, until somebody realized that, hey, maybe we don't need to build these big cubes by the water anymore, because that was a requirement that came from steam power, and everybody had just kept on building like that because they knew that that was how you built factories. So as you moved from these prime land, really expensive waterfront properties out into the countryside, you cut factory costs by 2/3. And yet it took 60 years for somebody to realize this. So I think we're going to see a couple of interesting developments in the next decade. And I would particularly look at the way data right now is being centralized into Facebook, into Amazon, into Google, into Twitter, into a few more, Apple and what have you not, Netflix. This was exactly the discussion that we had with Microsoft versus GNU Linux in the 90s and around the turn of the century. Like, a decentralized hobby-made system can't possibly beat out a powerful centralized developer team that is sitting side by side and have all this momentum going for them. And yet, today, Microsoft is running GNU Linux in their data servers. And I think that's something we should look at, because the notion of smart contracts, the notice that Ethereum brought about, is the first real break with the x86 architecture of running on a PC box that we've had in 2 or 3 decades. We've had virtualization, we've had elastic virtualization, we've had clouds, but all the processors today still think they're running in this old IBM 4.77 megahertz PC, only scaled up a bit. It's been abstracted to the processes by layers upon layers, but they still basically think they're running on a 4.77 megahertz PC. Ethereum and smart contracts break this notion entirely, and you can now run processes literally in the network itself, which is a new paradigm. And I think this, combined with decentralized collection of data, combined with decentralized building of value through collection of data, combined with artificial intelligence working on this decentralized collection of data, is going to run over Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google like a steamroller, in pretty much the same way GNU Linux ran over Microsoft. It's got the momentum, it's got the permissionless innovation, and that in the end cannot be held back. I think that's the really, really interesting thing to watch. Another thing to keep on the radar is the so-called System D, which is a fine word for the black market, or the unregulated business. Let's call it unregulated business. That's mostly happening in the third world because they don't have this requirement of bookkeeping and accounting for your average vegetable stand on the corner, for example. But if you can give these sort of everyday small businesses some easy accounting that fits in a phone, that allows them to invoice all over the world, and that connects them financially, I think that can become a very interesting global power that unseats today's banking and everything that today's banking is holding up. And that's what I'm personally working on. So that's my things to watch out for in the next decade. And I'm sure there's going to be things I'm missing, and well, let's keep the discussion going.